All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack one of history's absolute most fascinating unsolved mysteries. We are looking at a literal cold case today, the Indus Valley Civilization. We're going to examine the evidence left behind by this massive, incredibly sophisticated society that just vanished, taking its biggest secrets right along with it.
So picture this. You've got a thriving Bronze Age society with advanced plumbing and perfectly standardized architecture, but it completely lacks any of those towering monuments to megalomaniac kings that we see in basically every other ancient culture. And you want to know what's even more frustrating for historians today? They left behind a written language that we still completely cannot read. It's a society that honestly seems to break all the usual rules of ancient history. And just to give you an idea of the sheer scale here, this civilization stretched across a huge chunk of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. Built primarily along the Indus and Saraswati rivers, its footprint was actually far larger than its super-famous contemporaries in ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. We are talking about a vast, sprawling network of thriving, connected urban centers that flourished between 3300 and 1300 BCE.
Now, to really understand them, we need to anchor ourselves in time, because this wasn't just some brief phenomenon that popped up overnight. No, this was a multi-millennium epic. It started all the way back in 7000 BCE with early farming settlements, and it evolved over thousands of years, hitting its absolute peak, what we call the mature Harappan phase, around 2600 BCE, before going into a long, slow decline. So this was an incredibly enduring and resilient society.
Okay, let's talk about their urban planning, because it brilliantly shows how they built their cities with a scientific discipline that honestly rivals modern zoning laws. They didn't just build wherever they felt like it. They followed strict, deliberate steps. First, laying out a rigid grid system. Second, using universally standardized baked bricks. And third, prioritizing highly advanced drainage. I mean, it is city planning on an absolute master scale. Take a city like Mohenjo-daro, for example. You've got a very clear division between the raised citadel on one side and the sprawling lower town on the other. But here is the most astonishing part. Despite this highly structured layout, archaeologists have found a complete lack of monumental palaces or grand royal tombs anywhere. Whoever was in charge here definitely wasn't building giant monuments to themselves.
And you know what the secret weapon of this incredible city planning was? It wasn't some kind of crazy ancient tech. It was a seemingly humble object, the standardized baked brick. Whether a city was way up in the north or hundreds of miles away down in the south, the bricks they used for construction were uniform in their proportions. To coordinate that level of standard manufacturing across such a massive geography, that proves they had a highly centralized and incredibly organized administration.
But it gets even better. This massive organizational superpower wasn't used for vanity projects. It was actually used for public health. They built covered drains lining the streets, individual wells for homes, and even public baths, like the famous Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro. They prioritized public health, sanitation, and hygiene in a way that was, quite literally, thousands of years ahead of its time.
So, the crucial takeaway here is this. Yes, there for sure was social stratification. We see elite classes living near the citadel and middle to lower classes down in the fortified lower towns. But unlike a lot of other ancient empires, there is no evidence of a brutally oppressed underclass and absolutely zero evidence of massive warfare. There are no giant caches of weapons, no murals depicting conquered enemies. Life in the Indus Valley appeared surprisingly peaceful and remarkably egalitarian.
Now, when we look at the hard data of what they actually produced, we see they were an absolute agricultural powerhouse. They were growing wheat and barley, and they were actually among the very earliest people to cultivate cotton. They domesticated humped bulls, sheep, and pigs. And in terms of metallurgy, they mastered copper, bronze, gold, and silver. But note the glaring absence here. They had absolutely zero iron.
These folks also really loved their precision. The number 16 is super key here. They used an incredibly precise and standardized base 16 weight system. Just imagine trying to trade goods across a massive empire without standardized weights, right? It would be total chaos. But the Harappans used uniform weights in multiples of 16 for their massive trade networks which reached all the way over to Mesopotamia.
Which brings us to a massive brick wall in our understanding. With all this trade, all this incredible administration, and all this organization, what do they actually sound like? What do they name things? What kind of poetry do they write?
The crazy part is, the answer is staring us right in the face. This is the Indus script. It's a pictographic language found carved onto thousands of steatite seals, copper tablets, and pieces of pottery.
And yet, despite over a century of trying and literally throwing modern supercomputers at the problem, it remains completely undeciphered. It is incredibly frustrating for historians because until we can crack that code and read it, their direct history, their unique voices, and their innermost thoughts are entirely locked away from us.
Gods without temples, the religious mystery.
We definitely know they had a rich spiritual life, but because there are no grand temples, we have to look at objects small enough to hold in the palm of your hand, like the famous Pashupati seal. It shows this meditative, horned, three-faced figure seated cross-legged, surrounded by wild animals like a tiger, elephant, and rhino. A lot of scholars actually believe this is a proto-Shiva, an early form of the Hindu deity Shiva, known as the Lord of Animals. It strongly suggests that early yogic practices were a really central part of their spirituality.
And they certainly didn't just worship male figures. We've found an absolute abundance of terracotta figurines widely believed to represent the mother goddess. Often adorned with heavy jewelry and really elaborate headdresses, these figures suggest a deep societal reverence for female deities, fertility, and the overall energy of creation. It's a really strong indicator that women held an esteemed and respected position in Harappan society.
They also left behind incredibly intricate animal and nature motifs. There's widespread evidence of animal and tree worship, specifically things like the peepal tree, acting as the bedrock of their spiritual life. They believe spirits resided in nature, which showcases a worldview that was just heavily intertwined with their immediate environment.
The 600-year fade. Why did they vanish?
Right off the bat, let's debunk the myth of a sudden overnight apocalyptic end. That's not what happened. Starting around 1300 BCE, they actually suffered a brutal combination of catastrophes over several centuries. Forensic archaeologists point to shifting river courses that completely starved their crops, massive earthquakes, biological outbreaks like leprosy, and shifting populations. So it wasn't one dramatic smoking gun, but rather a devastating slow-motion sequence of earthly disasters.
Which leaves us with this haunting question to wrap up our explainer today. How does a society so incredibly peaceful, so organized, and so advanced simply fade into oblivion? You know, the Indus Valley Civilization didn't fall to spectacular, dramatic conquest. It just slowly eroded away as the rivers shifted and the climate changed. It is a brilliant, sobering reminder from the ancient world that no matter how standardized our bricks are or how advanced our plumbing gets, every civilization is ultimately at the mercy of a changing Earth. Take that thought with you and keep questioning the past because it has a lot to teach us about the future.